as mentioned, the U.S. election today, a very important day. And again, for those who might think otherwise, well, I need to let you understand and know that what happens there impacts not only the region, but the wider world. Whoever's the leader will now put forward foreign policy, put forward certain bills that ultimately can impact us. And when we look at some of the major ticket issues, immigration, economy, trade, the conversations that surrounds this particular election cycle, well, we need to pay close attention. I want to welcome U.S. behavioral pollster as we get into that deep dive regarding the U.S. election. Mwale Henry, he joins us on the Zoom line. Mwale, I want to thank you for the time and thank you for the great article you put forward. This particular read was very interesting. Heart versus Wallet was the title, and I'll give you a chance to elaborate some more. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Jason, and good morning to your viewers. Yeah, definitely this U.S. election is a pivotal one, and it's a historical one. And it's historical for three key reasons. It's historical in its candidate, it's historical for its candidacy, and moreover, it's historical for its campaign. You know, we've never had a presidential candidate who's been an attempt of his life 3 times, has occurred, from the historical nature of Vice President Kamala Harris, being someone who is breaking the glass ceiling. So for those key reasons, we have history that's running out in the making.
Yeah, I see you said here that it's an issue between America's kitchen table and a cultural crossroad. Of course, the cultural crossroad, I know, is to deal with Kamala and what she represents, I would imagine. And well, yes, people are looking at the economy. Trump is basically asking, are we better off in the last 4 years? You would have had Kamala Harris, who was the vice president, to President Biden. So again, lots of questions. Is this is economy a major part? Because I know immigration, I've seen lots of debates and discussions in that regard, and we'll get to that momentarily. But do you think the big ticket issue would have been the economy?
Well, there are 5 big ticket issues: the economy, immigration, foreign policy, healthcare issues with regards to women, and more importantly, foreign policy.
But what do you think is the ticket that actually affects Americans on the ground, from the person in Nebraska to the person in New Jersey to the person in Nevada?
What the polls show is that the 3 key areas would be the economy and immigration and foreign policy.
Okay.
So when it comes to Trump's message about low taxes, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security, his record of a stable economy, outmatches the Biden-Harris high inflation, high food prices, high gas prices. And then what's key, very, very key here, Jason, is that Kamala has been tied to what is called the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, this act is central to the inflationary issues that are happening in the U.S. And this is not just me, but former Cabinet Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, he said, and I'm going to quote this, he says, it's the least responsible macroeconomic policy in 40 years. And Kamala Harris had the casting tie-breaking vote in the Senate. So many voters see her as central to the economic challenges of the U.S.
Interesting. Do you think the media attacks on Trump, of course, his 34 counts, the felonies, the fact that he was charged, and lots of the mainstream media every day for, at least 4 years, it was just Trump. Do you think that backfired ultimately?
In short, yes. And I'll tell you why. Because one of the research showed in Media Research Center, they did a study and they saw that Kamala Harris, she had an 85%, 78% positive coverage. But when it came to Donald Trump, he had an 85% negative coverage. And in political communication, what that has caused is Trump realized he had to turn to what is called low propensity voters. And who are low propensity voters? Mainly youths. And those youths, they are defined whereby they do not customarily follow politics. They only engage in the late season of elections, usually around 10 to 17 days. And they depend, and this is very key, Jason, especially for, for media communication, they depend on alternate sources of media sources. So they're very skeptical of CNN, NBC, Fox News, MSNBC. And because of that, what has transpired is Trump's message has gone to the podcasters, YouTube shows, micro-influencers. And just to name a few, from Joe Rogan, just his interview with Joe Rogan, mastering 45 million views. Now that takes laps around any type of audience that CNN could attract. So Kamala Harris, in no doubt, has the star power, like the Taylor Swift and Usher.
Yeah, and she got the endorsements, major. I mean, I've saw endorsements from people I would have never imagined seeing Eminem on a political stage.
Yep. So Hollywood is flocking to her, but when it comes to Trump, he has the staying power because he has trade union workers, the admiration of Elon Musk, and the verdict is definitely out. Would young people turn up to the polls? And that's the key question for today.
Well, interesting you said, via your article, when I was going through it last evening, you said that Kamala Harris, she has the money, but Trump, he got the momentum. But did that momentum get a spoke in its wheel with what they sometimes quote as the October surprise? Obviously, that Madison Square Garden rally a couple Sundays ago with the comedian coming out and making such derogatory statements about Puerto Rico, which is part of the U.S., and other speakers on stage really going far left with their arguments. Lots of people kind of said that put, as I would have mentioned, kind of spoke in his wheel. Do you think that will ultimately impact how people vote today?
Well, good question. So let's look at the polls, and that's how we will answer that question. Now, traditionally in 2016 and 2020, the polls underestimated Trump. So they did not have a precise way to measure his momentum and influence. So there is a clear mistake, in terms of the social science of how you do polling to formulate a clear strategy. So right now, when you talk about polling, Jason, there are some key areas. You're talking about sample size, margin of error, sampling, weighting, non-responses. And what we've seen in the polls is in the area of margin of error, there has been an increasing expansive space for the margin of error, whereby people are simply saying the polls are tight. The polls are tight. It's too close to call. And then another area is weighting, whereby when pollsters are doing their interviews and they're calling, they find it difficult to find working class persons because they are non-responsive. So the polls generally would have been taking more Democratic voters versus what we call your rural voters or your urban voters who are working class. So when you look at the clear politics average, Donald Trump is leading in Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, and North Carolina. But in these last days, Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, has gained some traction in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. However, it is still a statistical tie, but he has a slight edge in terms of the momentum.
Wallet versus heart, heart versus wallet. Very interesting read indeed. Let me ask you, again, the obvious. We look at gender. The fact, of course, back in 2016, Trump went up also against a woman who would have had experience, former First Lady, former, what she was again, the Secretary of State, I believe it was.
Yes, she was.
Right, with a brand name, that Clinton brand name, right? So we're looking at Vice President Harris. She's in the mix, and we have seen countries all over the world. New Zealand would have had a woman at the wheel. England a couple of times. Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, you name it. Lots of countries all over would have given a woman a chance. Do you think America is ready for again, it's today. We'll know at least later on in the week. You think there are people who still question a woman taking the wheel of our country like the U.S.?
Well, I will tell you, from the introduction of Kamala Harris, she brought a lot of energy into the democratic process. Before President Biden, when he stepped out of the race, he didn't look too well in the poll. As a matter of fact, his unfavorability rate presently is around 67%. So Kamala Harris definitely brought a lot of energy and excitement. It's historic in terms of being the first female vice president. That's the second highest political office. First woman, South Asian descent, first Black American candidate for any major political party. But here's where I will depart in terms of the conventional wisdom that the mere fact she is a historical figure, would voters automatically cast their vote for her? When it comes to, it is true, the abortion rights, fertility treatment, Donald Trump loses the argument. But what I would contend with you, Jason, is that it's a storm in a teacup. When it comes to women, 85% of women are in charge of consumer spending in the US. Also, they also purchase over 50% of traditional male products. How I know this? My wife is one of them. So when women are reflecting on the economy and they think about Harris, because she's tied to the Biden-Harris administration, she's tied to the Inflation Reduction Act, people conclude by saying, my pockets are hurting. And Nikki Haley...
And the polls are showing this because, you would assume that a woman will automatically give an next woman in this historic moment the opportunity to serve, but you're saying they're looking at other issues per se.
Yes, they have to face the grocery shelves. They have to face the gas stations. They have to do buying decisions. They have to do decisions for medical care, child care. So when these same women who are interested of this historic moment, they conclude or they are hesitant to simply automatically give that support. Put it in this way, if Kamala Harris was not a part of the administration, I could tell you here confidently, she would be sailing towards that victory line. But because she has been a part of the administration and her decisions are being measured, there is a hesitation to give her full support.
And I guess via your article, that's why you would have said, quote, the heart wants what it wants, but the stomach needs what it needs.
That's right. That's right. So no doubt Harris wins the women issues in terms of democracy, a fight for democracy. Out of all the key issues, Trump wins on the economy, foreign policy, immigration. So this election can either be about the stomach, which is kitchen table issues, or an election of the heart, which is gender and reproductive rights. And I'm saying from the polls and from the trend, I'm leaning on the side of the kitchen table.
Foreign policy, immigration, and at least the position from Trump, who is clearly indicating that he's going hard to deport, unregistered folks in the U.S. Of course, Kamala, their particular policy, I guess, will continue from what happened in the last 4 years. What's your take in that regard?
Well, definitely the Democrats have always had what we would call a favorable policy when it comes to immigration. And I will use the term legal immigration for this case. Me being a resident of the US, I have experienced that type of ease of process. But when it comes to the Republicans, they've had a much more stringent process in terms of analyzing who comes into the country. So the argument presently for this election has been about illegal migration and how do we manage that process. So my estimation when it comes to migration, Harris has failed on the border, whilst Trump wins the border issue. And this is clearly based on the statistics according to U.S. Customs and Border agents. They've had over 10 million immigrants coming into America. And the impact on the election has lifted up the stories of the death of Lincoln Riley, a 22-year-old nursing student from Georgia, Jocelyn Nungore, a 12-year-old girl who was killed in Houston, both killed by illegal immigrants. So parents directly blame Harris for this border crisis, and they support Trump's top stance on illegal immigration.
And what I like about the discussion this morning, you're dealing with the facts, the numbers, the polls, you're dealing with the science of it. This is not about emotion or who you like, who you don't like, really. This is based on momentum, based on your samples and what you've seen. So ultimately, as we look to wrap things up, this more will be, I guess, a personal perspective. What you thought of the tone and the tenor? For me, I was a bit disappointed. I'm thinking that a lot of us, especially here in Trinidad, unfortunately, look at the U.S. sometimes to take lead. We look at their blueprint, and I trust and hope that style. I mean, we already bitter on this side with our political process, but we have really seen, to me, one of the nastiest election cycle in recent history. Your observation?
I do agree that, the election cycle has been very, very challenging. To your earlier question when we talked about the impact of media and how does media impact the conversation of election and as you put it, the tone and the tone. Now, when you think about that discussion that's been happening in the US election, one of the key things I've realized in political communication, there are 3 stages in political communication. You have penetration, you have saturation, and inundation. Now, penetration is where you get your message out, but it shocks the voter. So you heard things like, Trump's a racist, he's a fascist, he's Hitler. Or Trump would say, about Kamala Harris, she's dumb, she's slow, she's unintelligent. But then when you go from penetration into saturation, where people hear the message from 50 to 60 times, what happens, especially in ads, Jason, what happens is people move from the subject of the ad to now the sponsor of the ad. And usually the person who perpetuates such a dark message begins to get what is called the law of diminishing returns. And the truth is, Kamala Harris, she had the largest bank for this presidential election in terms of over upward of $1 billion. And the polls are showing that because she's moved the voters from the place of saturation to inundation, they are now looking at her as the subject of the ad, and they disbelieve some of the striking conversation that is taking place, and hence Donald Trump is now known as Teflon Don, who's standing.
Well, Emwale, let me thank you so much for stepping in. I wouldn't even ask who will win because at this point it's anybody's guess, but let's see how things pan out in the days ahead, and let's probably...
I have a little guess.
Tell us fast, we have to run a couple seconds. Who do you think?
300 plus votes that's going to happen for the Electoral College. The winner is going to take all of the Senate and the seat. I'm leaning towards Trump. He definitely has the momentum. Right. Kamala has the movement, but definitely Trump has the momentum in his way.
Well, Emwale Henry said at TNT. Emwale, we'll touch base next week. Let's promise to do that next week and have another discussion. All the best, my friend.
Okay, cheers.
Interesting indeed. We'll get a chance to talk some more after the 7 a.m. news update. See you soon.